The Sita Udupa Endowment Lecture was endowed by the staff and students of the Department of English, both aided and self supporting, in the year 2002 to honor the life and achievements of Dr. Sita Udupa. Dr. Sita Udupa is not only a phenomenal professor, but a remarkable individual as well. She is a proficient speaker in English who is highly passionate about Tamil language, a voracious reader with a unique talent for words, and an efficient administrator with a strong dedication and passion to serve the society. By means of this endowment lecture, we commemorate her ceaseless dedication towards the academia and her ability to touch lives of many over the years. As a student of the department, I feel that all the generations apart, Dr. Udupa's love of literature forms an undying connection that resonates with each of our souls, and it is this kindred spirit that we celebrate today. I now invite Sharini to present the welcome address and introduce our guest speaker for the day, Dr. Anindita Sahoo.
The greatest glory in living lies in not never failing, but in rising every time we fall. I quote and unquote Nelson Mandela. Good morning to one and all present in this virtual gathering. I deem it an honor to welcome all of you on behalf of Postgraduate and Research Department of English, Ethiraj College for Women, to our prestigious Professor Sita Udupa Endowment Lecture. I extend a warm and cordial welcome to our respected chairperson, Srimati Chandra Devi Panikachalam, all our former and present members of our trust board, principal and secretary, Dr. S. Kaude, vice principals, both aided and self-supporting, Dr. Devi Usharani and Dr. Usha Priya. It is an honor to welcome Dr. Sita Udupa, who has made it to our program today. I welcome our support systems, Dr. Mangayarkarasi, Dean of Academics, Associate Professor and Head, Department of English Aided, and Dr. Yashoda, Associate Professor and the Head, Department of English, Self-Supporting, at Raj College for Women, Chennai. I also welcome heads of various departments and retired faculty members of the Department of English who have been our pillars of support. Faculty members of Department of English, coordinators, organizers, friends, welcome. My hearty welcome to our chief guest, Dr. Anindita Sahoo, Assistant Professor, Linguistics, Department of Humanities and Social Sciences, Indian Institute of Technology, Madras. It is indeed an honor to have you amidst us, ma'am. I deem it a great privilege to introduce Dr. Anindita Sahoo to our participants today. Our chief guest, Dr. Anindita Sahoo, is an assistant professor in the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences at the Indian Institute of Technology, Madras. She obtained her PhD in linguistics from the Indian Institute of Technology, Delhi, India. Her PhD thesis analyzes passive constructions in selected South Indian languages. Her primary research interests are in linguistics, typology, syntax, and pragmatics. Her recent works focuses on the typology and grammaticalization of voice and copula constructions. Once again, on behalf of Postgraduate and Research Department of English at Raj College for Women, I welcome you, ma'am.
Thank you, Sharini. It's a lovely welcome. Yeah. Should I start speaking now?
Just a second,
Thank you, Anindita
Alia.
ma'am, to have joined. Thank you to have accepted our invitation quickly. It was a short notice, but in spite of that, you accepted our invitation. Thank you so much for joining us, ma'am.
Thank you. Okay, so before I sort of talking about my work, I must say this is indeed a privilege to be here with all of you, the faculty members, the students. I really take it as a privilege, even if the invitation came pretty late, and then I didn't really have much time. But there is absolutely no dearth of my excitement to be a part of this very prestigious lecture, and I hope I'll stand up to the expectations of the students and the faculty who are gathered here for this occasion. I must I'm kind of thankful for giving me this opportunity. The first person that I would like to name is Dr. Mangay. She's a friend. And then more than being a friend, she's also a potential, kind of a collaborator. We have been talking about to work together on certain things. And when she reached out to me with a request for talking about language and culture, I was initially a little apprehensive, but then primarily because of the very little time that I have in hand, but considering we all speak languages and we all have cultural identities, I thought I can do justice to the event from my linguistics training. So I understand this is primarily a culture studies and literature crowd. I'm going to I am pretty I'm familiar with the kind of challenges that I might have while bringing in a couple of linguistics jargons. So there is a disclaimer here. Kindly bear with me if you find certain linguistics specific terms a little, kind of more technical, and then do stop me if you find it difficult to understand. On that note, it's indeed a matter of pride and privilege to be here as a speaker of this very prestigious occasion. So I would start my presentation in a minute, maybe. So I just need to start presenting the slides. Okay. And then, so may I know, what is how I'm going to present? It's going to be an interactive session, or I'll just finish talking. Then if there are questions, we'll take it up. And what is the time limit that I have?
You can take up your questions. Finish talking, you can take up your questions later.
And what is the time limit? That will be really nice.
As you wish.
Okay, all right. So I have that freedom then. Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, so my slides are here. Okay.
Thank you, ma'am.
Yeah. Okay. Can you see my slides? Is it visible?
Yeah.
I don't want to go for the full screen because once I go, go for the full screen, I'm not able to see anything on my, for my references. Is it okay if I keep it like this? Is it visible?
It's visible.
To all of you?
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
It's a pandemic that we all are experiencing collectively, I would say. And I got to know that there was some of your colleagues, she is really not well. And then that's the reason why a lot of arrangements couldn't be made in the right time. But let's hope we get over this terrible pandemic in as soon as possible. So that's my wish to all of you. Okay, so before I talk about language and culture, this is what the outline of my talk is going to be. We all are human beings, and then we speak languages. When I say languages, I'm referring to language with a small L. And when I try to explore, or when I'm trying to understand the linguistic issues, I'm going to understand, or I'm going to target language with a big L. So some of you might not be familiar with this difference between big L and small l. Let me just very briefly give you an idea what it is for a linguist. So when I talk about language with a big L, that's about natural language, or the language that the human beings speak. And then that's different from any other kind of communication system that we have in the world. You might generally, when I ask this question, what do you understand? What do you think? What language is? The first thing that, or the first answer that comes to me is language is a mode of communication. Of course, this is a mode of communication, no doubt about it. But that's not the only thing that that languages do. So when you were familiar with the term called language faculty, which is biologically, kind of wired in our human brain, and just by being a human child, you are kind of gifted with with a brain which can process the linguistic informations. So my understanding of language is going to be natural language, which is and that is primarily meant for or exclusively meant for the human beings. Of course, it is a vehicle for communication purposes. We use it for effective communication for sure. But language is not that's not the only function that language does. That's the first statement. And the second statement, to communicate, you may not use language all the time. So there are other kinds of paralinguistic, or there are processes which go beyond your linguistic input. So we do have non-verbal communication for that matter. Without speaking a single word, you can convey a whole lot of emotions. So even if there are certain overlapping instances, or there are certain overlapping components between language and communication, we must focus on language with a big L, which is the language faculty that the human beings are gifted with. Okay. So that's my understanding of language. And when I go to small L means the different kinds of languages that we are speaking. For example, I'm a native speaker of an Indo-Aryan language, that is Odia. I do speak Hindi almost like a native speaker because I spent a significant years of my life in Delhi. So which is why I do speak the Delhi variety of Hindi. And I'm equally confident and comfortable and fluent in English because that's the language that I use for communication purpose, be it professional or personal with friends when they come from a different linguistic community. So these are the three languages I'm comfortable with. Most of the Indians are multilingual, kindly remember that. And we do juggle between languages quite, without much effort. So it's a very spontaneous kind of a process. We do have code switching, code mixing. While speaking in Odia, I might move to English sometimes. And so is the case if you're speaking in Tamil, you might move to English or another language that, let's say, your friend is familiar with. So these Hindi, Tamil, Telugu, Malayalam, Kannada, Marathi, Gujarati, these are the small Ls. And these languages have a significant influence on the cultural context that I'm going to talk about. So let's say if I'm talking in three different languages, I do understand Hindi language and the culture associated with it. Being a native speaker of Odia, which is another Indo-Aryan language that comes from the eastern state of India, which is Orissa. So my cultural practices, my habits, my customs, my traditions, they do get reflected through the kind of language that we speak, the kind of words that we use, the kind of morphological system that I have in my linguistic repository, I would say. So it's like linguistic repository is a huge box, and then we have words, phrases, and different kinds of lexical items loaded there. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to choose the right kind of words depending on the cultural context that I'm in. So one is going to be your natural language, big L. The other one is going to be the small L. The small L's are primarily related to the cultural context, and then the big L is a mental grammar. Remember that. So that is more psychological, biological, cognitive, which is the Chomskyan way of understanding. And here I'm going to talk about the pragmatic and the cultural interface that language shares in the society. Okay, so that's just a brief overview of what you should expect from my talk. So I'm going to put it in the introduction slide, maybe in the next one, and then I'll talk about what is culture. I'm sure you do understand what culture is, the shared customs, traditions, all of these, and the linguistic identity that you have, or the regional identity that you have, or the religious identity that we have. Everything comes together to to give us an umbrella term that is called culture. And cultural studies, it's truly kind of interdisciplinary, I would say. We do have linguists who are trying to understand the connection between language and culture. Literature people, they're trying to explore through the literary devices or the literary pieces of writing to understand how culture gets reflected through the language that you use in a literary piece of writing. Then we have cognitive scientists who are trying to understand how the culture and cognition interface works. Psychologists do that, sociologists do that. So it's truly interdisciplinary if you look at culture studies as an academic discipline. So my stand is going to be primarily a linguist stand, as I mentioned. just a while ago. Okay, so that's going to be our understanding of culture, and I'm going to give you just a couple of examples from different languages that we have, like that at least I'm familiar with, and I would expect you to sort of extend it to the languages that you speak, and do let me know if you find your cultural identity gets reflected through the kind of languages that you speak, whether you speak Telugu or Tamil or Kannada or Malayalam, and how your cultural practices, customs, and traditions, they do give you a cue about the linguistic identity that you have. And then I'll bring in India as a culture continuum. This is India as a subcontinent. It's truly diversified in terms of language, culture, religion, ethnicity, all of this. So as a cultural continuum, what we should expect. And my focus is also going to be on these two terms, which you should note down. One is lived culture, the other one is aspired culture, and how it is reflected in our writings. Here, I'll bring in a lot of first-hand personal anecdotes that I have in connection with Odia. I'm sure this is not the right kind of audience because nobody is speaking Odia here, but I'll try to make it palatable as much as possible. And then I'll just give you one example from Banjari, which is a language spoken in Maharashtra, and how its words have been influenced by the different languages that are spoken in the surroundings. So that's how the outline of the talk is going to be. Okay, so this is the introduction, which I have already given you a brief overview about. So language is essential to human communication. Of course, all of us, we know that. But as I mentioned, this is not the only thing by which you communicate. You do communicate through postures, through gestures. Then we have sign language, which is an emerging academic field. In the recent days, people are trying to understand how the impairment issues can be resolved if all of us, we get more familiarity with something called sign language. Then you go a little beyond that, go beyond humanities, you are bringing in the computer language or the software language, which is also known as artificial language. So data science people are using a lot related to this. We are not going to go into that domain. So our focus is primarily going to be human communication using language as a tool, and how the interface of language and culture that's working together. Right. The second point, I think all of us, we know that since we are into literature, linguistics, and language studies, so we know it's a dynamic thing. Language is like a river, right? It flows, and it doesn't get stagnant at any point of time. New words are being added, old words are being replaced. So even if I studied linguistics for my PhD, I come from an MA English background. So though I'm not into literature much nowadays. No, it's not much. I'm really not into literature nowadays. But then that doesn't stop me to read stories or any. I'm primarily a prose person. So when I try to understand, when I try to read, to understand how language changes. So my focus on any kind of reading now, it's more about to understand how the language change is happening. And that you can find out not only from reading, but also from the oral discourses. Let's say all these TV programs, the kind of language that the news anchors are using, and that would give you an idea how rapidly and how quickly the language use or the usage of language is being changed in the recent days, be it English or any other Indic languages. Okay, one point here, I think during the introduction, it was said passives in South Indian languages. Not really, that is South Asian languages. Okay, so when I say South Asian languages, we include languages spoken in the South Asian subcontinent that I bring in. So we have Indo-Aryan, Dravidian, Tibeto-Burman, Austroasiatic. All of these languages are South Asian languages. So in my thesis, I explored passives in Malayalam, which is a Dravidian language, Odia, which is an Indo-Aryan language, and Khadiya. I doubt that any of you would know about it. This is a Munda language spoken in the hills of central India and Odisha, that area. So that's going to be Austroasiatic. And finally, the Tibeto-Burman languages, which are spoken in the northeastern states. So these are the major language families. And then we also have Great Andamanese family, which is recently claimed by Professor Anindita Abbi. So she claims that the languages spoken in Andaman Nicobar Islands, they do belong to a different language family altogether. So all of them, they create a continuum, or they have a, they have a linguistic continuum that we call India as India as a linguistic area. So when we say India as a linguistic area, that means we are talking about the interaction or the language change or the language contact that we have when we look at these varieties or this different families of language altogether. Okay, so that was just a disclaimer. All right, and then when we are trying to understand how language as a tool of human communication works, we must remember it's a dynamic system. It does change, and it changes whether for good or bad. I don't want to comment on that. If you're a language purist, then you would say, you talk to your grandparents, they would say, oh, you are actually making our language impure. What this new generation, they're bringing in too many English words or Hindi words for that matter. And then you don't speak Tamil the way your grandparents would speak. I don't speak Odia the way my grandparents were speak. So from one generation to the other, we do experience or we do notice language is being changed. So that is the feature of the dynamicity of language. So it not only changes over time, but also across geographical, cultural, and socioeconomic contexts. So time is not the only factor that induces changes in language. Rather, you have to look at how the sociocultural settings or the socioeconomic settings are working, which is why you have so many you encounter so many code switching, code mixing instances in your first language now than it used to be in the previous generation. So think about it. When you speak your first language, don't you think you are adding a load of other words from the other languages that you are comfortable with? Is it correct? Do you think, or you are a person who speaks, who stick to as much as possible the first language words required? Do you do that, or you kind of bring in a lot of words from other languages that you speak, especially English? Do we do code switching and code mixing?
Yes, ma'am.
We do that, especially the younger generation. So Suhasini is writing English, Hindi, and Tamil. Of course, that's what I do when I speak. I do bring in a lot of words from Hindi and English, and the next generation, my child, he even goes to another level. So he would bring in one word, and half of it would be from one language. The other half is going to be from the other language. So this is where the cultural influence gets manifested. I'll just give a very brief example, which I find very interesting. Think about, so I want you to notice how the cultural practices interfere here, or the cultural experience or identity interfere in your linguistic identity. So there's a word called banana in English. That becomes kela in Hindi. My apologies, I'm going to bring in a lot of examples from Hindi, not because I want Hindi to be a part of it, just that this is a language where I have a lot of culture-centric examples. I would be very happy if I get to know a couple of similar examples from Tamil at the later part of the discussion during the question answer session. Okay, so banana banana in English becomes kela, which is in Hindi. So when this child was growing up, there was a question, singular and plural. I remember when he was in nursery or KG or something like that. So you have to match the column, or you have to write a singular plural thing. So in his Hindi class, in his English class, he would write the plural of banana is banane. Can you think about it? Why this is happening? Banana plural becomes banane. Those who have manageable Hindi knowledge, you would know that kela becomes kele. So kela is singular and kele is plural. And what this child is doing, because of his equal proficiency in both the languages, what he did a kind of code mixing. And the code mixing is he's not just doing some words from one language and the other words from the other language. In the same word, he's doing in the same word, we find he's mixing the codes from two different languages. So what he's doing, since kela becomes kele, he wrote banana became banane. Actually, the plural of banana should be bananas. But then instead of bringing in the plural marker s, what he did, he brought in the Hindi plural marker a. So banana became banane. So that's an instance of how the linguistic identity or the cultural identity that might get reflected in your language, not the cultural identity on the part of language that you speak as your first language, or being a multilingual speaker, it can actually kind of influence in a big way. Okay, so this code mixing, code switching, it changes. So I don't know, maybe at some point of time, and then those who are watching, or those who are familiar with cricket commentary by Navjot Singh Sidhu, he would use the phrases like bolo mein. Bolo is like balls, and then instead of bringing in the S marker of English, they would bring in the Hindi plural marker. So these are the changes in the language that when you notice, my suggestion would be just look at how the news anchors in Tamil are speaking now, and do find out whether they are actually changing the style of speaking, or the way the words are being framed. So because of so it's just not the time that induces changes in language, but also the geographical, cultural, and socioeconomic contexts are being changed. And at the very culture specific example, which is related to the weddings, Indian weddings. Nowadays, what the Hindi film and then the television shows that they're doing, they're making Indian like a particular kind of wedding as a pan-Indian wedding, but that doesn't work in all the cultural settings. For example, all these celebrations like Haldi or Sangeet, these are absolutely Bollywood induced things in our Indian wedding environments or the wedding cultures. So, for example, my wedding culture, like the wedding culture in India, it never had something like Sangeet. So Sangeet is like the musical program that happens and it's purely a North Indian culture. And Sangeet is a word, it has become a part of Odia lexicon now. Now you go to the Odia weddings, you will get the invitation where they would write Sangeet and Mehendi. So how did it come? How come this culture of Sangeet, which brought in a new word like Sangeet? For us, Sangeet is Sangeeta because we have a lot of similarity with the Dravidian features of word ending. Our word ending is primarily vowel ending. Because I take a lot of pride in saying that Odisha is the hyphen between north and south. So we border like Andhra Pradesh, which is why we have a huge influence of Dravidian languages in our language. So that's again a culture sensitive thing. So if an Odia speaker now understands what Sangeet is, that's primarily a culture specific change that has happened recently. Sangeet has become a part of Odia weddings, which was not there 20 years back. And why it has come to our culture now? Because of the kind of projection that we have about the Indian wedding system. I would be very happy if you would affirm my claim. Does it happen in South Indian weddings also nowadays? Because I stay in IIT Madras campus, so I'm not really much familiar with what is happening in the city. Could somebody tell me, has Sangeet been a part of Tamil lexicon now? Or it's yet to be?
I think it has already started in a lot of weddings.
Started, right? Yeah, okay. So that's a culture-induced change which has reflected in the language. So, and Haldi is something that is in Odia, we would say Haladi because we have a lot of retroflex sound. Our Haldi system was different, but in North India, it's very different. So because of the projection of, and Bollywood is projecting it as a pan-Indian kind of marriage. That doesn't happen in this way. Your culture is different. My culture is different. You go to Northeast, the wedding systems or the wedding rituals are so different. And this is a particular kind of culture that is being projected, which is why it's being shown as a pan-Indian thing. Okay, so when you have a new word like Sangeet in your language, remember this is because of the cultural. This is because of because of the inclusion of a cultural variety which was not a part of your wedding, part of your culture before. So if in the next generation thinks that Sangeet is an Odia word or Sangeet is a Tamil word, you should blame the kind of pan-Indian projection that we have about wedding systems. Okay. So that's the reason why language is changing, not only over time, geographical and cultural reasons, and also socioeconomic context. The community which is more confident about the the community which is more privileged in terms of the socioeconomic status, that language becomes more privileged, or that language becomes more powerful, which is why out of 700 languages that India speaks, we have only 22 languages which are scheduled or which are recognized by Indian government. So that's also gives us a lot of clue how the socioeconomic context also influences the linguistic identity or the cultural identity. Okay. And then language is definitely a sociocultural reality, because no matter how much you are linking it with our mental grammar or the mental faculty, eventually language has to be used in a society. Without a society, without a community, language doesn't you cannot so one is the form, the other one is the function. So the reality of language use can only be tested when it is used in a societal context. So that's the reason why we would say that it's a sociocultural reality. And of course, it engages in social interactions in the context of culture and social institutions. So what are the two queries that I have here? What are culture-specific queries? How the change in a culture changes the language, and how much language and culture they influence each other. Okay. Here are a couple of slides which we prepared with a friend of mine, Dr. Shweta from IIT Patna, and we had a talk together some time back. So we'll just see culture and how culture, human, and language, they are kind of intertwined. So you see, when you look at culture, it brings in the nationality, it brings in the ethnicity, religious identity, all kinds of things which would be a part of the culture. Okay. There are a few very standard definitions. I don't want to go into the details of it. You can always figure it out by reading on your own how to comprehend culture. But one very important thing is in the very first point that we have. When we say the notion of culture, it has become quite popular. And how you are making it popular? It is you are trying to link the micro-social phenomena to you are trying to link the macro-social phenomena with the micro-social observation. So when you say Tamil culture or Odia culture or Bengali culture, so these are the macro-social phenomena. Within the broad term like Tamil culture, you would have variations. And maybe some districts would have certain kind of cultural practices. The other districts will have others, which is why we also see the linguistic variations. Some variations we call it dialect, some we call as simply a variety, like standard versus the dialect thing. So one is your macro level, the other one is the micro level. If your identity is Indian, that is a macro level identity. And if you come, if you narrow it down, then you have all these kind of linguistic identities which are available. On the other hand, within the broad linguistic identity also, you have the micro level questions, or you have the micro level concepts. So that is what we try to do when the linguists, they try to understand how the language and culture interface works. And in linguistic theory, in the classical linguistic theory, what we do, we try to borrow the notions and the definitions on what the culture is supposed to be. How should we understand culture? And then we are trying to explore how it gets reflected in the linguistic practices or the linguistic items that we use. A couple of examples that I have already given. Okay. Now I'll go to the lived and then the aspired culture, and how it is reflected in our writings or in our literature or the rich heritage that we have. Okay, so before I go to these, let me just give a brief idea about lived culture and aspired culture. I'll bring in one example. Why I'm bringing in this? There is a practice like in the traditional or the conventional Odia lives, we would have all these religious practices where we aspire to be, or those who are familiar with the Jagannath culture. Just to bring in a brief overview about it, in the Jagannath culture, we don't have the caste system. That means our scripture says that it doesn't really matter whether you are upper caste, lower caste, whatever. You have a free access to the temple that is in Puri, Jagannath temple. So I'm not going to quote the scripture or the writing that we have, because it will not be comprehensible to you, but at least just know that this is a temple which doesn't discriminate people from any kind of caste-based background. However, that's not true when you go to the little temple, like to the little villages where we still have the caste system being present. So the Odia society aspired to be casteless because Jagannath culture is quintessential to the Odia identity. Our scripture, our writings, the language that we use, we have an indication that irrespective of whatever caste that you are coming from, there is absolutely no limitation to enter into a temple. So that's the aspired culture that we have. And why we call it aspired culture? Because that's been written in the scripture which we considered holy or sacred. That means if we follow these lines, so that means we are not supposed to have any kind of caste-based discrimination, which is such a wonderful thing. But then when the matter comes to the practices in the especially in the rural areas, we still have caste system being practiced there. So in that case, this is our lived culture. So our language, our scripture, our literature shows that we are aspiring to be a caste-less society. But when we are going to the lived culture, we do exactly opposite. That is another very interesting anecdote that I hear from people. That is this daughter-in-law and mother-in-law. So we have this Bhagavat Tungi, we say. So Bhagavat is a it's not Bhagavad Gita actually. It's Bhagavat, which is being which is a part of our culture. And then these two, the mother-in-law and then the daughter-in-law, they went to listen to that. And as usual, as all religions preach, so it's all about good things, how you should be courteous, kind, and then to your fellow human beings. And after they come back, they fight at home. So then the daughter-in-law is saying, oh, you went there, and then there was like you listened to the Bhagavad lines, and then after that you are coming back and fighting with me. This is not how our scripture teaches. Then the mother-in-law is saying, what you heard there, you keep it over there. So that means the aspiration or the aspired culture is going to be, this is how the society should be. And this gets reflected in the kind of language that we have, in the kind of literature that we have, in the kind of scripture that we have. But when the matter comes to the regular kind of life, we are deviating from that. So that's what we are, or that's what I'm talking about, the lived versus aspired culture. Another example. We are celebrating a festival called Raja. If you don't know anything about it, kindly Google it. So here, this is a festival where we celebrate Mother Earth, and we believe that these 3 days, Mother Earth is menstruating. And that's the reason why we are not supposed to do any kind. This is an agrarian society, and then most of our celebrations are related to the agriculture. That's the reason. So these three days, we believe Mother Earth is a woman, of course, because that's a mother, and then and she's menstruating. Because of the menstrual reasons, we need to give her rest. So that is why no plowing, nothing, no agrarian work or the no culture work should be done in these 3 days. So that's the aspired culture. That means we are so open, we are so broad-minded that we don't really treat menstruation as a taboo. But when the matter comes to the lived culture, it's still a taboo. The women, they don't feel comfortable. Forget about the men. It's even the women, they don't feel comfortable to talk about menstruation in public. So there is a difference between lived and then the aspired. We aspire to do something, but we live in a different kind of culture. Our aspiration gets reflected in our literature, but when the matter comes to practice it, we have a clear-cut difference in that. Okay, so that's there we have the intersection between the language and culture interface. What we talk about culture, that gets reflected, but it doesn't really get practiced. Okay, so and some of the cultures are tangible, some of the cultures are intangible. These are all the regular introduction sort of things. You can check it later. But these are very generic kind of definitions related to culture and identity. Now, this is important. So how and why I would say language and culture, these are kind of strongly linked with each other. They are actually inseparable. If you know somebody's culture, it's better you know their language. It's not necessary, it's not humanly possible to know all the languages in the world, because the world speaks something like 7,000 languages or 6,000, 7,000, the number varies. But then it's always good to understand one's culture when you know their language. And that's the reason why it would we say that language can be observed closely and tightly, which is when you understand their culture together. And in one way, you can say language and culture are inseparable. That means you can't, there would be a lot of overlapping, and it's very difficult to keep them or to segregate them. And at the same time, on the other hand, we would also say language and culture, which are also independent. So that means your cultural practices and your linguistic identity, they can be independent at certain, like in certain instances. And the third point is language and culture, they are partly interconnected. So there are three different terms that linguists would take a stand on. When you say language and culture inseparable, that means the cultural practices which has a huge influence on your linguistic behavior or your linguistic repository. That means your language reflects your cultural practices. And then when you say language and culture, these are independent. That means no matter whatever your linguistic identity it could be, you stick to your culture. Let's say I have moved to Delhi after like to do my PhD, and then I came to Chennai. Even if I don't know, even if I don't know Tamil as a language, which I'm trying to learn, but at least I do understand a bit of Tamil culture, and it would be really nice if I know their language a little more carefully. Okay. So that's what we are going to have in terms of the language and culture independent thing. And when we say these are interconnected, the interconnected thing comes in the kind of examples that I gave you just now. So you have aspirations and you have the lived culture. The aspirations get reflected in writing, and the lived culture seems to be completely different from that. Okay, so these are the three different terms, three different stands that the linguists are taking. In this connection, I'll just bring in, before I sort of give you the regional influence example, there is a term that linguists understand or the linguists follow is called linguistic relativity. So when I say linguistic relativity, that means the world is a diversified area. That means we speak so many languages. And all of these languages, the theory of linguistic relativity would say that the way you think or your thought process, that gets reflected through the kind of language that you use in the day-to-day discourse. The best example, I have it in the next slide. There is a word bridge. Okay, you talk to a Spanish and you talk to a German. For a Spanish, the bridge is masculine, and for a German, the bridge is feminine. So when a Spanish person would describe a bridge, they would say, "Oh, it's strong, it's robust, it's huge." All these masculinity indicating terms would come in. At the same time, when a German person would be asked to describe a bridge, maybe they would say, it's beautiful, it's lovely, it's pretty, all kinds of feminine related terms. So linguistic relativity would give us the kind of cultural understanding that we have. So in a Spanish culture, the bridge is going to be a male, but in the German culture, the bridge is a female. So this gender difference is also the result of the cultural understanding of the term called bridge. So you should not be most of my language at least is gender neutral. We don't have this key difference. Hindi as a language is extremely gender sensitive. So when you say door and then the window, see how the cultural practices of gender in terms of masculinity and femininity gets reflected through the kind of objects that we have. When it is a window, it's going to be feminine. When it is a door, it's going to be masculine. If you know Hindi a bit, you would know that when they say door, they would say khula hai, which is open, and when it is window, khidki, they would say khuli hai. So this is also, so that means what sort of cultural understanding that we have about this society. A society that speaks a language like Hindi would probably have an understanding of masculinity by the size, by the area that it occupies, or by the kind of function that it does. So this cultural dichotomy of masculinity and femininity, not only available in the Germanic languages or the European languages like Spanish or German, rather we have in Indic languages like Hindi. Or Gujarati or Marathi for that matter. Odia and Bangla, even if these are Indo-Aryan languages, we don't have the gender difference. I think in Dravidian languages also we have gender differences. Just correct me if I'm wrong. So now what should we gather? So this is what we are talking about, linguistic relativity. So for me, one thing, so it's a relative affair, it's a relative concept, a bridge which is neuter, like it's not really biologically masculine or feminine, yet it will have certain, it will have depending on the kind of linguistic identity of the person, it will be treated as masculine at some place, feminine at some place. Door and window, which are absolutely lifeless things, one of them would be masculine and the other one is going to be feminine. Hindi is very funny in these aspects. So I think chai and coffee, they have a difference. Milk and water, probably there is a difference. So all of these, that becomes a part of your linguistic identity depending on the cultural practices you have. So because of the huge dichotomy or the strict strict dichotomy between the two genders, this gets reflected through their language. So do let me know if you find something similar in your language because of the cultural dichotomy, or because of the cultural practices you do see there's a difference in your linguistic manifestation. Okay. Now I think I need to, these are all linguistic stuff I would skip. What I'll do, I'll give you how the regional influences that affect the cultural practices, or the or culture and regional influences, to put it together in the very simplest, in the simplest form. Okay, this is a study done by a student of mine, which is on Banjara community in Maharashtra, where you have multiple. So this community is actually surrounded by multiple other languages being spoken around. They call, the name of the language is Banjari, and it's spoken by the Banjara community, and it is also known as Lambadi and Gardboli, or there are other names of this particular community. And there is a huge influence of the southern, and then the languages spoken in the southern and the central India. It's written in Devanagari script, but the speakers would be found in Maharashtra, in Madhya Pradesh. Like the Lambadi speakers, or the Banjari language, see how the script gets changed. The Banjari speakers staying in Maharashtra and Madhya Pradesh would write in Devanagari script. Don't you see a cultural connection there? Right? There's a cultural connection. The same language is being spoken in one script in Maharashtra and Madhya Pradesh, but it is written in Kannada script when they live in Karnataka, and in written Telugu script when the Banjari speakers are in Telangana or Andhra Pradesh or Tamil Nadu region. So you would find Banjari communities in multiple states. You have Madhya Pradesh, you have Tamil Nadu, you have Telangana, Andhra Pradesh, and Maharashtra. All of these states, we have the Banjari community. What happens because of the local or the regional influence? When the script is being written, it's written in Devanagari in certain states, in Kannada in another state, and Telugu in the others, in the other states. So here is a link between the culture of these states, or the language of these states, and how the cultural community of Banjari, they get segregated at different places. Okay, so now let's have a look at it. There is a word. Just a minute. I'm sorry, I'll just take 1 minute. Okay, yeah, so I'm sorry. Okay. So that's the problem when you have. Okay. So now here is the list of words that we have. So when you have, I'm not able to read this. This means the agricultural land, and so this is a word which has come from another language. Grihayik, they are saying, which is a word that has been derived from grahak in Hindi, and koni is another word which has come from Rajasthani. So look at the morphological inventory or the lexical inventory of this community that they have. So we have Banjari is a community which are spread across different states. their script becomes different when the community stays in a particular state. On the like beyond that, we also see the influence of so many other languages. We have the influence of Hindi, Marathi, Konkani, and Rajasthani on this very tiny community, or not well represented in the linguistic scenario of country, that is Banjara. So this gives us a clue how the language and culture interface, they work together. So when you talk about agricultural land, the understanding of the agricultural land of Banjara community would be different when they move from one state to the other. Okay, so that's just one simple example that I have given. To conclude now, since we have brought in examples from let's say cultural practices in Orissa, marital practices in Orissa, or you have the celebrations that we have, the festivals that we have, or for that matter, the morphological system that we have, or the word system that we have, it would be safe to claim that language and culture, they are intertwined. It's even if the linguists are going to take a stand that sometimes they're interconnected, independent, or sometimes it's inseparable, but there is no denial on the fact that language and culture, they are intertwined. They influence each other. Cultural practices influence your linguistic manifestation, and then the linguistic identity or the linguistic repository that you have, it influences your cultural practices, which is why Sangeet has become a part of it, and the word Sangeet has come to our which has come to our repository. And please do not forget that when you interact with another language, that means you are also interacting with the culture that speaks that language. When I speak Hindi, I do understand the cultural practices that Hindi speakers have. Similarly, if I speak Tamil, which I'm trying to, it would be easier for me to understand the cultural practices that the Tamil speakers will have. It will always be nice if you know a language, and it becomes easier for you to understand the traditions, the customs, and the systems, or other kinds of practices, cultural practices that the community has. Okay, so it's also equally important to remember culture, it remains incomprehensible without accessing its language directly. So that means maybe you are watching TV or Bollywood movies, and then which is why all these Mehendi, Sangeet, all of these things have been popular. I'm sure I would not be surprised if after 10 years a festival like Karwa Chauth would be celebrated across India. Could be, because the way it is being glorified on the TV screen or in the silver screen, like the Bollywood big screens in the multiplexes, very likely Karwa Chauth would enter into the Indian households in a few years. So that's a reason why when you do, like, that means the kind of Karwa Chauth that a non-North Indian would do would be different from the cultural practices over there. So if you want to understand somebody's culture, you definitely try to understand their language. Without that, it remains incomprehensible in most of the cases. And to know more about the specific society's customs and behaviors, it's definitely important to know their language. It's not humanly possible to know all the languages, but it's always good if you know the language. Again, so that's a disclaimer. If I want to know more about Tamil culture, because this is a place where I'm living, so it'll be always nice if I understand the language better, because the kind of linguistic terminologies it will have, which will be associated with Tamil practices, it would help me to know the cultural systems and traditions better. And finally, I haven't really brought in this discussion. Languages are getting weakened. And some people would say English is a killer language. Some others will say Hindi is a killer language, because the East Indian people would say Hindi is a killer language because a lot of Hindi words are getting unwillingly getting part of our lexicon. And some people would say this is the English education is actually the colonized. It's encouraging the colonized mindset, which is why English is a killer language. So all of these things are being spoken in the linguistics discourse. But one thing you need to remember: languages are dying, or weakening, or getting endangered, whatever you might say. So either you call it weakening, endangerment, or dying, death. So some linguists won't agree with me that languages don't die, but for sure, some languages are getting weakened over the period of time because of multiple socioeconomic, cultural, administrative, educational reasons. And but what remains a fact, what remains a truth, is that when a language weakens, its culture definitely gets weakened. So the cultural practices, the cultural systems, the traditions, all of this, they get weakened when a language gets weakened. So that's the reason why we must always give priority to our first language. In spite of any other language that you're speaking or communicating with, please do not forget your culture would thrive, would flourish when your linguistic identity is strong. On that note, I say thank you, and I think I took a bit of time, but it's indeed a matter of pleasure to be here. I would be very happy to have some question answers. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am, for your elaborate views on language and in its cultural context. The floor is now open for discussion. If anyone has any questions, please put it forward. If you cannot unmute, you can even put it in the chat box. That's all right.
I would really be happy to have some questions.
May I?
Hello, ma'am. Hello, Padma, ma'am. Hi. Yeah.
Congratulations, Anindita.
Thank you.
After a long time, getting back to an academic lecture, and that too on linguistics, on languages, and the kind of language change that we have been subjected to. It's been so refreshing. I mean, my colleagues would understand, from the department would understand, simply because they've labeled me as a language person, who taught ELT for years together in the department.
Yeah.
But it has been so refreshing, and I'm so happy that to see, the next generation so full of, so much of fervor and enthusiasm talking about language and language change. I always believed in a very Elatian sense that between the idea and the reality falls the shadow. Especially where languages are concerned, and language and culture and the intermixing. I feel sorry, that my grandchildren, for example, much as I kind of try and impose Tamil to them, they are sitting in a foreign country, they don't seem to appreciate the fact that, that they need.
It's very unfortunate.
Yeah, except for the term party, which I'm subjected to. Otherwise, they don't seem, they'd love to. I mean, they're willing to learn Spanish, they're willing to learn Latin, but Tamil, it was very important for me anyway. But talking about, language change, and especially the decay of language, there is something, as I call, a culture shock that comes through.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So, how do we do away with this culture shock? Would it take ages for us to get over that kind of culture shock, as like going to a foreign country and experiencing their culture? We do have, even within our generation, between my generation and the next one, and the present generation that is witnessing all this, you notice that there's so much of changes. I don't know if it is a positive or a negative one, but invariably, for the purists, it is a negative one. What is happening to the language that these children are using? Why are they doing this? What would happen to a language like Tamil, or what would happen to a language like English? And we always say, gone are those days, those golden. I don't think that is true, that it is possible to retain the purity of language and therefore of culture. Just want your thoughts on this.
Okay, so I would say when you bring in the terms like culture shock, but probably it's high time for the parents to to let the children know about the cultural identity that they have, the linguistic identity that they have. So the children who are being born and brought up at a foreign land, and when they come back to the homeland, if that is a culture shock for them, it's very saddening. It's very disheartening, I would say. And more than I'm not a language purist in that sense, but more than the children, it's basically the onus is on the parents. So instead of telling the children that, oh yeah, why don't you speak your language, we should ask ourselves, are we doing enough so that our next generation would would get to know the rich, vibrant heritage that we have. So yeah, I think, and I didn't really mention that during the talk. It's children who are the carriers of your linguistic cultural traditions to the next generation, or to the future. So, to prevent that culture shock, even if you are staying in a different place or in a foreign land for that matter, in India itself also things are quite foreign. For example, when I stay in Tamil Nadu, I really don't know, like my child doesn't know much of the Odia traditions anymore. So we don't have to go to another country. Considering India is so vast in terms of the linguistic diversity and the cultural diversity, it's always good for the parents to make sure that the children should know what the cultural practices they have. So when they go back home, it should not be a kind of an alienation, the feeling of alienation that they would put in. So I would rather put the onus on the older generation, the parents, the grandparents, instead of pushing children to an environment where they would feel it's a culture shock. Yeah, so that's what I would say.
I would talk in Tamil. I would, sing the nursery rhymes, everything.
Yeah.
They do understand because they are very small. But a slightly older child would say, "Oh no, come on, party. Make yourself more comfortable by talking to us in English."
English,
The present generation, even here in India, they say, "Oh, come." When you listen to, say, a cricket commentary in Tamil, or you listen to the commentary in the stock market, the trading thing in Hindi, you notice every other word is an English word.
English, exactly. It doesn't sound even to be in that sense. Yeah.
So I don't know about this, the kind of codes that they use, or the kind of code switching that they do. But there are people who have learned another language by watching, cricket commentary, or for that matter, even
talk shows, primarily
talk shows, TV serials. I know a Malayali friend who has learned Tamil by watching Tamil TV
shows. Yeah, I agree. So that's a different discourse.
Yeah, that is there. But then there's certain areas of commonality, I do understand. But my worry is always about the kind of decay that is, slowly
the languages have.
Languages
and need to be careful. Yeah,
and our culture.
I agree.
Wonderful session.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you very much. It's indeed a privilege to be here. Yeah. Okay. I see a question by Rohini in the chat box. Rohini is writing, apart from the words that we use to communicate, we have signs that we use online. Oh yes, right. So that's a wonderful question. Thank you, Rohini, for asking this. Somehow these emojis, I think they're killing languages. More than English, the emojis actually are killing languages. So it's like for each emotion we have an emoji now. So I think a word like frown or angry or maybe disbelief, probably the new generation will forget the spelling of disbelief, will forget the spelling of probably astonishment or embezzlement in that sense. So all these longish words, the spelling is going to be forgotten because of this. I don't know, I shouldn't use the term stupid, but then these emojis, the stupid emojis, I would say. Yes, the online communication, it does influence our linguistic practices or our linguistic repository in that sense. This influences our culture, and this is surely a universal phenomenon. We should not blame a Tamil kid or an Odia kid or a Hindi-speaking kid for that. It's a worldwide phenomenon, and this is also a part of the pragmatics research. I would clarify that a lot of academicians are a part of pragmatics of communication in terms of the emoticons and emojis. Yes, they are replacing the linguistic units or the linguistic phrases, but let me tell you, that's not a good symptom for a language, or that's not a good thing for our first language, or for that matter any language that we speak. Yeah, so emojis are easy to type, and then very effective in terms of the communication. And sometimes when you don't want to say anything and you're like grumpy and you you just don't want to speak, so they just send some emojis, so that they behave, or they can be counted as rescuers at that point of time. But for sure, it affects your language and your culture. Of course, it does. Yeah, I hope I answer. Yeah, thank you,
Thank you
Rohit.
so much, ma'am. It is true that it has become a new language now.
Yeah.
So, yeah, thank you so much for
Yeah,
clarifying.
it's universal. And then this it's not just any one particular language, but yes, even if it gives you some opportunity to be brief, because remember, okay, there's another thing. There is something called economy of grammar. We humans, when we use languages, we always try to be as brief as possible during the spoken discourse. Written is a different discourse altogether. I didn't go into that. But when we speak, we try to keep it as brief as possible. Maximum information using minimum number of words. It's like thumb rule in communication. Those who have attended these courses, communication theories. So this is called economy of grammar. And then we can also say economy of usage by taking into account the emoticons. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
Any other question?
Ma'am, I have
Alia.
a question.
Hi, Alia.
Yeah, hi, ma'am. I recently realized that,
Mhm.
I mean, not recently, I mean, it's there, but it suddenly dawned upon me that the
Mhm.
language I speak, my mother tongue is Urdu, right?
Urdu, okay.
So, so my Urdu is
Yeah,
very different from the Urdu that people speak in other parts of the country, right?
yeah, yeah.
So I happen to hear from my uncle that the Urdu
Uh-huh.
I speak is not even Urdu.
Yeah, that's um so this comes in the okay. Do you have another question,
Uh,
like an
but
extension?
it's just that I wonder if I have developed this. I mean, not developed. I mean, has this become whatever I speak? Has this
Yeah.
become kind of a Creole just to maintain communication, or
Mm.
I mean, I don't even know if it's the pure language that I speak
Okay.
anymore. So
All right. Yeah. So my answer to you would be a linguist answer here. We don't believe really much in this, uh, dialect thing. For me, every language is a variety. Because I know I'm getting late, but then I would like to bring in this discussion. Something which is a dialect now can be a language later. Something which is a language now can also be a dialect later. I'll bring in the Braj example here. Braj is a Boli. Boli is a dialect. But you go back to the Mughal era when the rulers, they were patronizing this language. A lot of scriptures we have which are written using this language, but with the change in the administration, it has become a boli now, or it has become a dialect now. It was a thriving language. So Ramcharitmanas was written in a language which is Awadhi. I think it's Awadhi, correct? Okay, probably it's Awadhi. So this doesn't qualify to be a full-fledged language anymore. But when it was getting the patronage, it was definitely thriving at that point of time. So it was a language. Now it become a dialect. So it's all about it's all about the socioeconomic privilege, the political patronage, or the administrative support that the languages get. Bihar is a state which has multiple languages. We have Maithili, Bajjika, Bhojpuri, Angika, right? So these are the four major languages of Bihari. For the longest period of time, they all were considered to be the dialect of Hindi. So it's like, if you look at Hindi, what is Hindi then? So Angika was also a variety of Hindi. Bajjika is also a variety of Hindi. Bhojpuri and Maithili, all of these, they were considered to be variety. But now look at this: Maithili, Bhojpuri, Angika, Bajjika, all of these are independent languages on their own accord. So what is a language? What is a dialect? That's a different thing. Similarly, if I go back the other example I must give: Bangla and Odia. Orissa was considered to be a part of Bangla until 1936, I think. Okay, so when the state became an independent state, we have this language movement. And there was a Bengali gentleman, Kantinath Bhattacharya. He would say Odia ekta bhasha noy. That means Odia is not a language, rather it's a part of Bangla. Now look at this, it's a classical language. It has this long history, and this is the 6th classical language which have been added, which has been recognized by the Indian government. We have such a huge heritage. We have Odissi music, Odissi dance. We have this inscriptions on the rock edicts. So all of these are there. So there was an attempt to prove that it's not a language, but it has not only established itself as a language, it's also one of the oldest languages of the country or of this area. So what is a language and what is a dialect? That's a very, it's a debatable thing. And primarily it's about the socio-political influences that it has. Now, coming back to your kind of Urdu, I would count it as a variety of Urdu. Instead of calling it impure or something, or less prestigious or less, it's no less than the other kind of Urdus that we speak. If you are a purist, you are going to say that. But as a linguist, I would say, otherwise, what is your, which state are you coming from?
Tamil Nadu here.
Tamil Nadu, right. So then your Urdu would have a lot of influence of the state language, right? Your Urdu would have words from Tamil, if I'm not wrong, isn't it?
Not really, but I
would have
there's
some
a
kind of
difference.
influence,
Yes,
because
ma'am.
just check it, like just think about it once. It would have influence, because that is how languages influence each other. Okay, so you would, because I know the kind of Urdu that Muslims in Odisha they would speak, and that Urdu is so different. So that doesn't mean that I'll say this is not Urdu. That would have a lot of Odia influence on the kind of Urdu that Odia Muslims would speak, for that matter. So instead of calling, or instead of saying that this is not Urdu, rather you should be convinced that this is a variety of Urdu that you are speaking. So let's not judge any language on the basis of the speakers that it has, or the kind of morphology that it has. Rather, let's be convinced that languages are dynamic. They get influenced by the socio-political, cultural, religious, regional influences. That's the reason why we have so many variations in any given language. For that matter, your Urdu is as much Urdu as another variety that is spoken in maybe Lucknow. So Lucknow Urdu would probably be considered as the finest or the purest kind of thing, if I understand it correctly, because the Lucknowi kind of adai and all of these things that they have, Urdu Zaban or something like that. So I love to listen to Javed Akhtar, his interviews. He would say, as long as you understand it, it's Hindi. The moment you stop understanding, like if you cannot follow what is being said, it becomes Urdu, right? So do watch his interviews. That would be interesting. But my personal stand is that it's just a variety, and it is being influenced by the languages which are spoken in the surrounding. Okay.
It was very comforting. Thank you, ma'am.
Yeah, thank you very much. Okay, all right. Any other question? Okay, all right. So we are done then. Thank you, ma'am.
As we come towards the end of the session.
No, I think Dr. Mangai is saying something, but her mic is on mute.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Anindita, to have joined us, and it was really wonderful, interactive, cleared all our clarifications, doubts, and other ideas. You've given a lot of inputs into that. Thank you so much. Over
Thanks
to
happy to be here. Yeah.
I request Rashmita Tambi to present her vote of thanks.
As we conclude our final session of this academic year, we would like to convey our heartfelt gratitude to the speaker, Dr. Anindita Sahoo, for taking the time to conduct this insightful session. Thank you very much, ma'am. We would like to extend our gratitude to our principal, Dr. S. Kodai, for granting us permission to conduct the session. A sincere thanks to the heads of the Department of Aided and Self-Supporting, Dr. J. Mangayarkarasi and Ms. K. Yashoda, for their constant encouragement and enthusiastic involvement. A big thank you to Dr. Ramana Devika and Ms. Nanam for their guidance in conducting the session. Thank you to all the teachers and fellow students for being an active part of this webinar with your patience and positivity. We hope the session was useful and has given you a new perspective about culture and its dynamics. Lastly, we would like to end this session by wishing everyone good health and well-being during such tough times. Thank you very much and have a great day.
Thanks, Rashmita. Thank you, everyone. It's indeed, this is like from the bottommost core of my heart. I really enjoyed the session, and then it was a great privilege to be here. Thanks a lot. Yeah.
We'll end today's session by playing Call It song.
நிதியமும் மழை திறந்த வெள்ளம் போல வளமும் வந்து நல்கினார். குழந்தைகளுக்கு கல்வி கோயில் வாழ்வுடனே நிறுவினார். கொடைகள் நாம் எதிராஜின் கொள்கை வழி செல்வோம், ஏறுவோம், முன்னேறுவோம். பாட்டுடனே அறிவியலும் பலகலையும் பயிலவோம். நாட்டினிலே அறத்தை காக்க நல்லொழுக்கம் போடவும். ஏற்றினிலே கற்ற கல்வி என்றும் எங்கள் நெஞ்சினில் கூட்டும் தெய்வ பக்தியோடு தேச பக்தி ஓங்கவே. ஏறுவோம், முன்னேறுவோம். மயக்க தெய்வ தீபமாக ஒளிரும் கல்வி சுடரில் முயன்று தேடி காணவே முன் வைத்த கல்வி தாங்கிடும். முயன்று தேடி காணவே முன் வைத்த கல்வி தாங்கிடும். முயன்று தேடி காணவே முன் வைத்த கல்வி தாங்கிடும். ஏறுவோம், முன்னேறுவோம், என்றுமே முன்னேறுவோம். எங்கள் எதிராஜ் கல்லூரி ஏற்ற வாழ்வில் தேருவோம். ஏறுவோம், ஏறுவோம், முன்னேறுவோம், ஏறுவோம், 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 முன்னேறுவோம், ஏறுவோம், 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 முன்னேறுவோம், ஏறுவோம், 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 முன்னேறுவோம், ஏறுவோம்.
Thank you all. We can leave now. Thank you.